Last week we spent some time reading Paul's letter to the Galatians. You might remember that Martin Luther called it the best book in the Bible. This week we've been thinking about the letter of James, and Luther, the great Christian reformer, had a very different view of James. He described it as an epistle of straw, and when he translated the New Testament himself, he consigned it to an appendix. I wonder if it's because Paul had a very different approach. In his writings, he was essentially targeting Gentile believers, whereas James was more aiming his writing at Jews who had come to believe in Jesus as the Messiah, the Christ. But there's one particular passage in James which I suspect that Luther wouldn't like very much, but I have to say I love. It's in chapter 2, and it says this: "What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save them? Suppose a brother or a sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, 'Go in peace, keep warm and well fed,' but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead." I suspect that Luther and others thought that James was speaking so much about deeds, about actions, about works, that he was saying that we're saved by those. I don't think that's what James is saying here. I suspect that the problem Martin Luther and others have with the letter of James, and this passage in particular, is that they think it puts forward a works righteousness. In other words, finding your way to God and to heaven through what we do rather than what we believe. But I think James is actually just trying to restore a balance between what we believe and how we behave. He never says anything other than that belief comes first and our behaviour comes out of that. And I think that this letter was probably aimed particularly at those who were wealthy amongst the Jewish Christian community. Some of them were seemingly looking down their noses at people who were poorer than they were. And James is reminding them that the way they use their tongue, the way they speak to people, the way they treat people, the way they spend their wealth and their possessions, how they use that gift of God, says something about the faith in Jesus that they have. And I think anyway that James is very well worth listening to, not just because this letter is included in Scripture, but also because he actually grew up as a half-brother to Jesus. And so he knew Jesus intimately, personally, just as a child, as a young person, before he came to prominence. And yet here he is, now an adult man, a leader in the church in Jerusalem, someone who was deeply respected, someone who believed that Christ died and rose again for us. He's bringing a very practical bent to all that we are as followers of Jesus, in everything we say, in everything we do. But James is worthy of our respect and worth listening to for more than one reason. I want to commend this book to you. It's called Unlocking the Bible by a guy called David Pawson. And he describes how James' life ended. It's tradition that tells us this because it's not recorded in Scripture, but nevertheless it's very well recorded history. He writes, "James came to a tragic but glorious end. Following the death of Festus, the Roman governor, and before Albinus took up office, there was a gap of about 2 months in AD 62, when there was no Roman governor. The Jewish rulers seized the opportunity to attack Christians because there was no Roman government to say you can't put anyone to death. At that time, they captured James. They took him to the pinnacle of the temple, the same place the devil had taken Jesus during his temptations. And they asked James to blaspheme Christ, threatening to throw him off if he did not. James' reply was, 'I see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of glory. And so they threw him off. The fall, remarkably, didn't kill him, and so they started to stone him. And as he lay there with his bones broken and the stones being thrown at him, he said, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." The crowd were amazed that in such circumstances James could think of others rather than of himself. Someone eventually came and beat him with a big wooden club until he died. And then there's this remarkable fact about what happened next. When his fellow Christians came to pick up his body and give James a decent burial, they were amazed because for the first time they saw his knees. They looked like the knees of a camel. Here was a man who spent more time on his knees than on his feet. And of course the implication there is that when he was spending time on his knees, he was in prayer. Yes, James was a man who commended good deeds, kindly acts of mercy and grace and love. But he did not depend on that. He knew his salvation was completely on the shoulders of the one who died on the cross. And that was why he prayed. So yes, the letter of James, no matter what Martin Luther has said, is well worth a read. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope, like me, you're looking forward now into next week, getting into the meat of Matthew's Gospel. In the meantime, God bless you.